But we welcome you to our fourth in a series of workshops focused on the CMMC, the cyber security maturity model that we're glad again to have Ms. Angela Dingo, who is the owner and operator of Cmmc, and she will shortly present the last of a series of four. What you can expect with this one is, which is entitled CMMC and the Road Ahead. Learn more about those proposed rules changes that are in the Defense Acquisition Regulation Supplement, better known as the Dfars, and understanding the contractor's reporting requirements, along with review of the project rollout of the Cmmc Framework. So this is what we bring to you today. We're definitely glad to have folks attending, and especially those that have been with us since the 3rd of February, and know a lot of good information has come out of this, and that will help you as you still grow and sustain your business, and the government adds even more requirements to us in order to do business with them. So again, we thank you for your patience in doing that. We have a short survey. Jacob, if you pull that up before we start, just trying to get a feel for who's been with us since day one and who's new. So if you take the time and check all the boxes that apply to you, we greatly appreciate it. Ken, while you're doing that, I've been tapped on my shoulder. I forgot to say who I was for maybe some people that don't know. Tommy Marks, the director of the Federal Procurement Center, which is a part of the MBDA, Minority Business Development Agency's business center family. And we are operated by the one and only Sharon Pender, who is the president and CEO of the Capital Region Minority Supplier Development Council, located in Silver Springs, Maryland. We are actually located in Alexandria, Virginia. Off of the King Street Metro for those folks that are familiar with Old Town Alexandria. Okay. So without further ado, we'll bring on Ms. Dingle so that she will impart more words of wisdom. Angela, the floor is yours.
Hello and welcome to everyone. I'm looking at this this poll and can see that about half of you guys have been with us for all of the workshops.
I see you talking, but I can't hear you.
You can't hear me. Let's see.
Actually, I can. You know what? The question really is, did anybody hear me when I was talking?
Yes, we heard you.
Yes, Tommy, we heard you. And we heard Angela as well.
We did. All right, so Jacob, if you share the results, the rest of the participants can see who all is here with us today. There we go, yeah. So about half of you all have been with us since the beginning. So thanks, Tommy, for having me. As he mentioned, my name is Angela Dingle. I'm the president and CEO of Cmmc Management LLC based here in Washington, DC. And today I'm going to talk to you about the road ahead for the CMMC. I had to don a headset today because there's construction here in the city near me, and I've been able to manage it every other time, but it's so loud today I thought that I'd save you from hearing those big old booms that are happening right outside my door. So let me share my screen with you, and then we'll jump right in and start talking about what's going on with the CMMC. So thank you, Tommy. All right, so hopefully everyone can see my slide deck. I like to make this an interactive discussion, so please feel free to put your questions into the chat. I try to monitor it, and if I'm not able to see that, then the team at the FPC will look at those questions and stop me along the way so that I can answer them for you. So we will be together today for just about 2 hours here, and I'll leave some time at the end for Q&A. I do have another event to attend right after this, so about a 1:55 wrap up for me, and then any additional questions that you guys might have. When we started this series in February, I started talking to you about the changes that were going to happen with the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation, or the Dfars, as it is commonly called. And so today I just want to do a deeper dive on what those changes are that are happening with the Dfars, help you to understand your contractor reporting requirements associated with each of those individual Dfars, because they are the pathway between where we are now with respect to the Cmmc and where we'll be in a few years. And then give you just some latest information that came out of the Cmmc AB, which is the accreditation body. I've spoken to you about them before, and allow you to ask some questions. I imagine that there are questions from people that have been in this series or are attending for the first time. So we'll have an opportunity to do that. All right, so Jacob, can you pull up that first survey for me? Every time we're together, I like to ask some questions just to get a sense of who we have in the audience and what ways I might be able to assist you. So if you want to pull that first one up for me, that would be great. All right, so this question really asks about how many of you all have submitted your assessments to the SPRS system. And if you don't know what that is, or you haven't done it yet, or don't think it applies to you, there's an option for you there as well. One of the reasons I asked this question, and we're going to talk about it today, is there are increasing responsibilities on our part as government contractors to meet compliance and reporting requirements, and this is one of the latest ones. I see a question that has popped up there. So Jacob, we can leave that open until about the 1 minute mark, and then we'll close it out. Let's see. All righty, thank you. Okay, so everyone that's here today, several of you say that it does not apply to you, and then about 40% or so are saying that you have not uploaded your results into the SPRS system. So we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. And for those of you that have completed it, kudos to you. You had until November 30th to get that done. And so I'm happy to see that you've been able to take care of that and keep your company in compliance. So take a quick look at the chat. Dakota, I see your question about the SPRS system. It is the Supplier Performance Risk Management System. It is a new system that the Department of Defense has stood up to enable contractors like ourselves to report the results of our cybersecurity assessments. As we've talked over the series of this workshop, I've talked about different assessments that you are required to complete that are called self-assessments. And then there are other assessments that the government will do. We'll talk about them in a few more minutes, so you'll have a little bit more of an understanding about what that is. But there was a Dfars rule that was issued late last year that required contractors to submit their assessment results to that system by November 30th. So I see one more question there, and then I'll get to our next slide. Let me just make sure I answer that. How do we resolve this if you didn't do it by November? Mark, that's a great question. If you have not done it by November 30th, most often your contracting officer would have contacted you, and if he or she has not contacted you, they might do so at the point when you have an option year that's being exercised, or if you are submitting a proposal for a Department of Defense requirement, you will have to have submitted that prior to that time. It is open perpetually. It's housed within the same system where you submit your invoices through the wide area workflow network. So you may be familiar with that already. And if not, I think one of the other workshops in this series, I did a little bit more of a deep dive. And if that has not answered your question, my contact information is on the last slide in this deck, and you can feel free to reach out to me and I'll point you to where you can find it so that you can submit yours. So the changes that we're going to talk about today are new in some respects, but not new in others. They've been around for a number of years. And when we did the first workshop, I kind of walked you through them, and I'll bring you up to date on where we are with 2021. So some time ago, 2013, 2014 or so, the Department of Defense started kind of indicating that they were going to hold contractors responsible for securing their information systems in the same way that the federal government is required to secure its information systems. The nature of those requirements really has to do with unclassified information. So one of the things that's a little bit confusing about the CMMC program is for the contractors that have security clearances, they go, oh, we've already got this because we have a facility clearance, or we've done this for the government before. The requirements around CMMC are really not about the work that you're doing, that your staff is doing on site in a government facility, or the work that you're doing that is covered by your security clearance, if you have a confidential, secret, or top secret facility clearance. This is about protecting unclassified information that's in your corporate systems. So you and a customer are having an email conversation. The customer might send you some information about the contract or some information about the technical specifications that they'd like you to take a look at. That information in and of itself is not classified. It's unclassified, but this combination of, being able to grab 2 or 3 pieces of information and combine them together then gives our adversaries far more information about what our federal contractors are doing than the Department of Defense would like, the federal government in general. So in 2016, DoD issued a Dfars clause that essentially said contractors are responsible for securing their systems and safeguarding what's called CUI, or controlled unclassified information. You'll have to go back to one of the earlier sessions to keep track of all the different various acronyms that we have to use in the federal contracting space. But as this program has progressed, people have started calling CUI, or controlled unclassified information, CUI. And so I'll refer to it that way throughout the remainder of today's session, just to keep me from getting tongue-tied and you having to keep track of all the different things that I'm saying. The Dfars rule that came out in 2016 essentially said that contractors had until December 31st of 2017 to implement those safeguards that are designed to protect unclassified information that's in their systems. There was a component of that requirement that essentially said, hey, if you have not implemented all of the controls, tell the Department of Defense Chief Information Officer that you have not implemented them. And, if necessary, you can get a waiver or give us a sense of when you're going to be able to safeguard this information. Well, fast forward to today, we have CMMC because people either did not implement them or did not inform the CIO or were not able to safeguard that information. So since the 2017 date, DoD has moved forward with implementing a more formal way of enforcing contractors, forcing contractors to comply with that portion of the Dfars. So between 2018 and 2020, last year, January of 2020, the Department of Defense built this Cmmc framework. So the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Framework was built, and it was released in January of 2020. And at the time, the only Dfars clause that was applicable was the original one, which was 252.204-7012. So you may hear people refer to 7012. There's also an additional one, 7008, and then there are associated FAR clauses that existed but really didn't have the kind of teeth behind them that the CMMC program has. So in 2020, the model was built, and DoD at the time said, hey, listen, not only will you have to comply with these, we're going to put some teeth behind these, behind this model that will allow us to enforce it from a contractual standpoint. So there were 3 new Dfars clauses that were also created. in 2020. And those were released in an interim rule that came out in, I believe the interim rule came out in September. I provided that to you all in one of the previous workshops. So if you were not able to attend that workshop or don't have access to it, you can reach out to the folks at FPC and they'll provide you with a copy of those materials so that you can go back and look at that interim rule. The interim rule kind of took a look back and said, hey, since we started asked contractors to start doing this in 2016 and where we are now, there's only a small portion of them that have actually implemented this. So we want the ability to enforce this. We want the ability to enforce CMMC, the CMMC program as a whole as we build it out. We want the ability to ask contractors to start complying with that now in 2020, as well as any time in between. So there were 3 new Dfars clauses that were released in 2020. And as we start 2021, I want you guys to be aware of those. And I also want you to know what's going to happen between now, 2021, and 2025 or so, which is the time frame that DoD is hoping to complete the full rollout of the CMMC program. So the 3 Dfars changes were 252-204-7019. It set the conditions that must be in place from a cybersecurity standpoint for contract awards. So if you're going to be awarded a contract, 252-204-7020 sets the conditions for cybersecurity requirements for existing contracts, and 252.204-7021, which set the conditions for CMMC, which will come about in the future. So we'll look at each of these in a little bit more detail so that you can understand how each of them might affect your individual contracts and the types of things that you might be required to do. So we didn't ask this question today, but I know I've asked the question before when we were in this workshop series, and several of you have contracts with DoD already. If you have an existing contract with DoD already, you should have received a contract modification since that November 30th timeframe that added these 3 Dfars clauses if you already had a cybersecurity requirement in your contract already. So if you had Dfars 252.204-7008 or 252.204-7012, then you more than likely received this as a contract modification. So one of the more popular contracts in the DoD space is the Seaport contract, which is the Navy one, and that went out as a unilateral modification late last year to make sure that these things were enforced in your contract. So then we'll just take some time now and do a deep dive on each of those different changes. So Dfars 252.204-7019 is the newest set of requirements that have been put in place for a contract award. So in order to allow contracting officers to be able to enforce cybersecurity requirements on new contract awards, this change to the Dfars essentially says for contracts where NIST 800-171 is applicable. And so if we can think back to some of the other discussions that we've had in this workshop series. And Aaron, I'm going to ask you if you could turn your camera off because that's a tad bit distracting for me there. Thank you so much. So for those of you that have attended the other workshops, you know, we talked about the gap between where we are today and where we want to be with respect to CMMC goes along the road of using existing FAR clauses that have 17 cybersecurity requirements in them, as well as the NIST 800-171, which is the cybersecurity requirements that were defined in that original Dfars clause 252.204-7012. There are 110 controls in that set of standards. And so if you have this 252-204-7019 clause in your contract, then you will need to implement those requirements that are defined in that Dfars clause. And then and so it basically is about, so I've got data protection there because that's what it's about, right? It's about implementing the controls that are required to safeguard information. And what DoD has said with respect to your contract is your assessment associated with this must be reported, and a contracting officer has the ability to look for you to have complied with this in order for them to make a contract award. So the goal over time is to make cybersecurity a go, no go decision in the contracting life cycle and the acquisition life cycle. Why? Because our adversaries are stealing information. You have to have seen all the information that's going on right now, all the news programs and all of the reports that are coming out about the SolarWinds breach and how it also affected Microsoft and all of those things that are happening within the federal space that also end up affecting us as contractors. So DoD is trying to put this emphasis around our need to protect data in the same way that they are, and then giving the contracting officers the ability to enforce that so that it doesn't slip through the cracks and we have any more additional data breaches. So 7012 really is telling contracting officers that you have the authority to use this Dfars clause to make a go, no go decision for a new contract award. The next one is Dfars 252.204-7020. Now this one is for existing contracts. So if you have an existing contract and you have the Dfars 252.204-7012 in your existing contract. So again, those existing DoD contract holders who already had a cybersecurity requirement clause that was defined in your contract, the contracting officer now has the ability to enforce that for an existing contract. So like I said, if you have one already, you either will have received a contract modification from your contracting officer adding these Dfars clauses, or you should expect to receive one the next time that there's an upcoming unilateral modification for your contract. In our experience, we have seen that as soon as the March 30th deadline came about, and people were required to input their data into the SPRS system, we've seen contracting officers contact the company within about a 2-week period of time to ask them why, where they were with respect to having completed that assessment and whether or not they were going to do that. So in some instances, it was a contract modification, right? So they had a person who was billing on the contract already, and they wanted to replace that person with someone new, and the contracting officer used this clause to say, but are you complying with the cybersecurity requirements? And if you're not, we're not going to authorize that new addition to your contract. It might have been an award of an option year. So about the January timeframe was when we started seeing option year awards have an effect on, be affected by this particular clause. And so anywhere that you might need to make a change. So if you are, you have a current task order on a IDIQ and you are wanting to increase the funding level for that, you might see this clause being affected, or any other types of changes like that. If you have some type of deliverable or some type of modification that is tied to the contract, your contracting officer now has the authority to use this clause as a method of determining whether or not you're complying with those cybersecurity requirements. So it's going to be really important for you guys over the next couple of years to make sure that you're doing this. So same set of cybersecurity requirements, right? These are for the contracts where Dfars 252.204-7012 is already in your contract. And that contract clause is safeguarding controlled unclassified information. So it literally is the clause that directs us to safeguard this information. And then the third Dfars clause that was implemented last year is the Dfars clause that essentially says by about October of 2025, you will have to have a Cmmc, a cybersecurity maturity model certification. in place at the level that's defined in the contract at time of award. So let's fast forward a couple of years. You are interested in bidding on an opportunity that may be coming out from the Department of Defense, whether it's Army or Air Force or Navy, and you look through the solicitation and you see that there is a Cmmc Level 3 requirement in Section L and part of the evaluation in Section M. You will have to have that certification in place already. So you will have to have already been assessed by a third party certifying body and have that certification not only available, but that information available to the government at the time that you are submitting your proposal. And so they won't make an award without that certification being in place. Now, it's 2021 and I'm a contractor, right? In the end, the federal government gets to decide this. So all of everything that I've told you throughout these workshops, I want you to go to the sources. So as you look through the slides that I've provided you, I direct you to the actual source, because when it's all said and done, the Department of Defense is the only authorized, the only authority on the Cmmc program. And so I've tried to make sure that I point you to them as your source, because you know how it is in federal contracting, right? We hear from anybody and everybody about all of these things. There are a number of industry associations that provide us with really great information, but when it comes down to the specifics, when you want to get to the nitty gritty, if you want to know what this Dfars clause says, go to the source and look at the Dfars clause and make sure that your attorney and whomever is writing your contracts, that you guys understand that so that you can comply with it in a way that's applicable. And so I brought that up for this particular one because, you know, right now the language says at award. When you think about some of the longer procurements that happen in the federal government now, like you think about things like, you know, even on the civilian side, like OASIS and Polaris is coming up, and some of the DoD ones that we've worked on, the award timeframe is like a 2 or 3 year sales cycle. You know, they put out a draft and the draft is out for 6 months, and then they put out a final and it's out for, you know, 2 or 3 months, and then it's a year from the point that you that they actually make an award decision. Those idiosyncrasies we'll have to see, but the language currently is that at contract award, you have to have the Cmmc certification at the level that's specified in the requirement. So just keep that in mind as you look at these things. So I see another question up there. I'll try and get to that so that you are correct, Paul. Katie Arrington is the best source. I mentioned Katie during one of our sessions. Katie is the CISO. So Katie is the Chief Information Security Officer for this program for DoD. So she's driving this. She has been a great source for industry because she worked in industry before. We'll talk about some of the changes that are happening in government as we talk about the road forward. And Paul, I appreciate you bringing her up because she is a driving force to make sure that those changes are made in a way that is beneficial to both the government and to us. And I'll talk to you about that as we get there. So obviously with each of these Dfars clauses, there are some reporting requirements that, that come along with them. So the reporting requirements for Dfars 252-204-7012. And so this is the requirement to safeguard CUI, controlled unclassified information. Your reporting requirements there are to make sure that you're reviewing any type of cyber incidents, right? So you're supposed to have implemented these safeguarding requirements, and then you need to be reviewing to make sure that if there are any cyber incidents that are happening, you know what they are, and then you have an obligation to report them to the DoD CIO, right? So the same requirements that existed in 2016, those reporting requirements are still applicable. When you report, you may have additional reporting requirements. You may have to report to the FBI. You might have to report to a credit agency, but in particular, you have to report to Department of Defense because they need to know what the threat is, right? Remember, we talked about reporting before. By sharing information, we all can protect our organizations together, right? They might begin, as individual companies report, they might begin to see a pattern that they can then issue us some guidance so that we can all collectively try to protect our systems at the same time. You also have an obligation to isolate any of the malware or any type of Trojan horses or whatever the malicious thing is, you are required to isolate that, preserve that data, right? So if there are files, if you see, if you see breadcrumbs, little bits of information that's left behind by the hackers, any of those types of things, you're required to isolate that information, preserve those records, and should the Department of Defense or any other, forensics organization want to come in and review what has happened or use that information to try to tease apart and figure out what happened, you need to make that information available to them so that they can make informed decisions about how, how much risk your organization now presents, what's the best way to isolate it so that there can be lessons learned that are shared internal within the government and then pushed out to the rest of the defense industrial base, the contractors that are doing business with the Department of Defense. And so as I talk about each of these individual Dfars clauses, you notice that you don't have a lot of text, and you don't have a lot of text here because again, I want you to go to the source and read these, right? In my experience in working with companies in the federal marketplace, first of all, our contracts are, by the time that you get a solicitation and they issue it, it's hundreds of pages. It's a whole lot of information for people to take in. And depending on the size of your company and your experience and the role that you play or the person that plays that is responsible for managing your contracts, sometimes people overlook these things. And so we have been both fortunate to work with companies who understand them and do them very well. We've also been fortunate enough to work with companies that were small and growing by leaps and bounds, but kind of tripped up on these things because the person who was responsible for reviewing the contracts and understanding all those various different FAR clauses didn't really understand the cybersecurity requirements, and it can be pretty costly. It can be costly to, the most costly thing is if you have a breach, but it can be very costly if you don't have a breach, right? You win the contract, you're doing some great work, and then the contracting officer starts asking questions about what you're doing with your cybersecurity and the amount of time and money that it can take to catch up if you didn't start that when you went into the contract can be pretty costly for you. And so I just want to encourage you to make sure that you read these things. The Dfars aren't necessarily the type of thing that you want to read to relax, but there's a lot of important information that you need as a business owner to understand how best to both protect unclassified information and to keep your company in a position where you can compete for federal contracts. So the next requirement is the reporting requirements for 252.204-7012 is the reporting requirement that we talked about. So earlier when we started this session, Dakota asked a question about the SPRS system. The 7019 Dfars change is what introduced that system. The 800-171, that's what you see here on the right-hand side. This is the regulation that tells us how to protect controlled unclassified information in our company systems, right? So it has those 110 controls that need to be implemented, and that's publicly available on the NIST site. You can just Google NIST 800-171. You'll find a whole lot of folks selling things, but you will also find a link directly to the NIST site where you can go and pull down this regulation in PDF form, or if you prefer, you can look up the individual requirements within there. There's a database that's available that gives you some guidance. So for instance, on the left-hand side here, you see the assessment scoring guide that was released in November, and I'll talk to you about that in a little bit more detail. But for this first control here, any of these controls that you see on the left-hand side, 3.1.1, which essentially says limit access to systems that contain this information to users that have been authorized. Well, on its surface, on its surface, that seems like a very simple thing to do. The great thing about having publicly available information like 800-171 is that you can go right to that source, you can open that document, and you can see what it is that DoD is expecting you to do, because there's some supplemental guidance that's there. And for CMMC, when you look at that model, not only do they provide the supplemental guidance, they actually provide some examples in layman's terms, right? It kind of says, hey, if you're the system administrator for your company and you've been told that you need to limit system access on your system, it gives you a scenario that you can walk through, excuse me, to help you understand how to implement that particular security control. And so as business owners, you then pass that along to your technical folks, and then they go and implement those security requirements. I'm going to just grab some water here. Okay, so on the left-hand side, you see here is the assessment methodology and the scoring template that was created when the interim rule went into effect. The interim rule essentially says not only do you have to implement 800-171, but you have to report the results of your self-assessment in accordance with the assessment methodology that you see on the left-hand side. I provided you guys with a copy of that assessment methodology and one of the other workshops. And so you have that at your disposal that you can go back and look at as well. And so your two main reporting requirements with respect to 7019 are that you have to conduct the self-assessment and that you have to report the information. And notice that I said self-assessment. The NIST 800 program, NIST 800-171, we talked about this in one of our other sessions. It is a self-attestation. So you are assessing it internally. You make a determination on a judgment call on how compliant you think you are, and you report that information to the Department of Defense. The CMMC is a third-party assessment. So you can conduct an internal assessment, and most people will advise you to do that, and I'll advise you to do the same. You can conduct an internal self-assessment to get a baseline of where you are and to improve your processes. But to get the certification itself, that is a third-party certification that you have to call in a third-party organization and pay them to do that assessment. So what you see on the left-hand side is a methodology that explains all of the different assessment levels. So there are basic assessments, there are medium assessments, and high assessments. Your contracting officer will let you know which type of assessment is expected from you. So you'll get that either in the form of a change to your to the clauses that are in your contract, or the contracting officer may send you a notification telling you that that's what their expectation is. You go through and you count up these values, right? So the maximum number of available points that you can get in this assessment are 110, because there are 110 controls that need to be implemented for NIST 800-171. The way that it works is you either get points for it. So for this first one, you would get 5 points if you fully implemented this control, or you get points subtracted. So it is possible to conduct the self-assessment using this methodology and end up with a negative number. And for companies that are just starting this process or don't have very mature processes at all, it's very likely that you'll end up with a negative number. The good thing is DoD knows and understands that. At this point, they're just trying to get a sense of where people are. What does their risk look like? All of this is about managing risk in the supply chain, because contractors and members of the defense industrial base form a huge part of the network of organizations that protect our warfighters from a DoD standpoint. So it's possible to have a negative number in addition to reporting this, this number that's associated with the assessment. You also have to report what's called a plan of action and milestones. And we talked about that, I believe it was in session 2 of this workshop series. A plan of action and milestones really is a report of the things that you have to do to mitigate all of the things that weren't implemented. So if I had 110 controls I needed to implement, and I've only implemented 75 of them, my plan of action and milestones, or a POAM, which is a very common way that people refer to it, will say for the remaining 30 some odd controls, Here are the things that I need to do, and here's the date that I'm going to have them completed. What you have to report for 1719 is the date when you're going to have them completed. Now, I've talked to a number of people in this space, and there are rumors going around that you have to upload your system security plan, you have to upload your plan of action and milestones. You do not have to upload those things. You have to upload the score. It's based on your CAGE code, so you need to know the CAGE code for your company. You kind of have to define what what the name of your system security plan is. So it's for most companies, unless you have a specific system that you use that is dedicated only to federal contracting work, it would be, company name information system. And then the results of this assessment, so that number, as well as the date that you intend to close out or get rid of all of those poems or the plan of action and milestones. That report has to be maintained so that it is current over a 3-year reporting time, right? So moving 3 years. So if you assess now, do a self-assessment now, and don't do anything next year, by the next year, you need to be taking another look at doing an assessment in order to remain compliant with this contracting, with this Dfars clause. So the system that you're reporting into is a federal system. And that system is accessible by federal contracting officers. So contracting officers and program officers have access to that and can go in and look and see what that score is. For the higher levels, like a medium or a high, they do have the right and the authority to come in and assess those systems yourself. And I'll talk to you about that in a couple of minutes. So if you've ever logged in to submit an online invoice through the wide area workflow system, you've used this wide area workflow and invoicing system on the left-hand side. But this is the Federal Procurement Integrated Enterprise Environment, or PI. And SPRS is one of the newest additions to this system. So it's a supplier performance risk management system is where you would log on and you would enter your assessment scores. There is an assessment guide that I showed you on the previous screen. It also has an accompanying guide that tells you how to log on, which options to select, how to create your account. So you do have to have a new role if you currently have access to this system already. There's a new role that needs to be created, and that guide will give you step-by-step instructions on how to do that. If you're a one-person company, so you are chief bottle washer and cook, then that means that you will, when you go to create this account, you'll get logged into the system, but the federal help desk will be the one that approves your account. So you would follow the same instructions, but you would wait for them to approve it. If you have staff and you have either a security officer, some people have their FSO, their facility security officers, the person that's responsible for doing this, whomever that person is in your organization, once their account is created, then they would authorize all the remaining ones. So that's the new SPRS system. Dakota, I hope that answered your question about the system, and that's where you can go and find out additional information about it. And then finally, within 252.204-7012, your requirements there are to make sure that you have done all the things you see in 7012, 7019, 7020, then says you've got to flow all of this down to your subcontractors. You're welcome, Dakota. So these are kind of cumulative requirements. We started basically with the safeguarding requirements, and then you've got some reporting requirements. And 7019 and 7020 clear up this little thing that's been happening in federal contracting, where in some instances, the prime contractors don't necessarily flow down all of the contract clauses. And in my experience, most of it has been simply because they don't know that they have to, right? Again, if you are, depending on how big your contract is, sometimes the clauses are all simply just listed, the number and the name of the clause are all listed in a section, like section I in some of the contracts. You just have all your contract FAR clauses and Dfar clauses. If you don't actually read those clauses, then you might miss the portion of those clauses that says this, the language or the substance of this FAR clause must be flowed down to all subcontractors in its entirety or in its full text, right? So people miss that. And we have worked with a number of companies where that's the case, right? And we've seen it on both sides. We've seen it where the prime contractor didn't flow down a cybersecurity requirement to the subcontractor. So when they attempted to ask the subcontractor to meet the cybersecurity requirements, they said, we don't have to because you didn't tell us to. And it's going to cost us too much money and we don't want to do it, right? And we've seen it the other way around where the clause was flowed down, but not in its entirety. And so the clause was flowed down, but not in its entirety. So again, the subcontractor didn't fully understand what it was that they were supposed to be doing. These changes that have come about with CMMC, so 7019 and 7020, tell you that it's mandatory to flow the clause down in instances where it's applicable, right? So the CMMC program does not apply to everything and everybody. The CMMC program applies to Department of Defense, the Defense Industrial Base, which is the 200 or so 100,000 companies that do business with the Department of Defense. And over time, it will apply to more, right? There is discussion about this being applied across the federal government, but for right now, your contracting officer makes the determination of what needs, so the program and contracting officer together, right? They make the determination of what level is applicable, what level of cybersecurity is appropriate to be included in these contracts. And then once that determination is made, the applicable Dfars clauses are included in the contract, and then they need to be flowed down, right? So with 7020, not only do you need to have implemented all the other things that we talked about, you have to flow down this clause to your subcontractors, and then you need to confirm whether or not they've implemented NIST 800-171. So 7012 says flow it down, and then check with your contractor to ensure that they have uploaded their scores into the SPRS system. So we're starting to see some interesting ways that contractors are doing that. Some contractors are having that information loaded and reported into a third-party system where they're directing you to use a third-party system. Know that that is coming from your prime contractor. It is not coming from the Department of Defense. Department of Defense requires you to put it in an SPRS. And, you know, depending on who you're subcontracting to, just think about the fact that they may have hundreds. If you're working with some of the larger companies, right? They might have hundreds of subcontractors or companies in their supply chain that they need to manage. And so some of them have stood up these third-party systems where they're asking you to report that information. And ultimately, you just want to work with them to make sure that you stay in compliance. You'll want to check, because you have a requirement as well. The results of an assessment can be classified as CUI, right? So now you've got a responsibility to protect the results of your assessment as well. So do some due diligence and make sure you understand where it is that you're loading that information when you're working with your prime contractors. Just get in the habit of asking, right? Trust but verify. Trust that what they're asking you to do is accurate, but also verify that the information will be safeguarded so that you can respond accordingly if any of those questions were to come up when talking to a contracting officer. And I'm gonna stop for a second and do a quick little survey here before we go to our next topic. That was our second poll. If you can do our third one, please, that would be great. All right, so do you need a CMMC certification if you're a subcontractor? All right, we're at about 80%. So folks, with the, once you get beyond the basic assessment, I'll just talk while you guys are still voting there. Once you get past the basic level assessments, the contracting officers and DoD personnel have, Jacob, you can close that for me. Thank you so much. Yay, that means that you guys have been listening. So 80% of you correctly answer that. You do have to have a, so I asked a double negative there, right? You do have to have a Cmmc certification if you're a subcontractor that is working on a DoD contract or is interested in subcontracting on a DoD contract that has a Cmmc requirement in it. So even if it's level 1 requirement, if that requirement applies to your subcontract, you will have to have a Cmmc certification in order to do business with DoD. And the prime contractor is responsible for ensuring that that certification is in place. Okay, you can stop sharing those results for me. Thank you. Yeah, so the other thing to keep in mind is that as you as this cybersecurity maturity model, this whole concept progresses, note that you will have times when you need to make your facilities available for DoD to come in and do inspections. In particular, once you start talking about medium and high assessments, they're going to trust but verify, right? You're going to upload your results, and then they're going to come back and they're going to ask to have access to your people, your facilities, your contracts, your systems, so that they can verify what's going on. All right. Okay, so let's talk about what the projected rollout of Cmmc looks like for you as an individual business owner, and then we're going to do a quick case study, right? So as you move forward, right? So right now we're in the space where NIST 800-171 is being implemented, and there are pilots that are going on with respect to Cmmc. Between now and then, you need a strategy, right? You need something that you need to be working on, and this is the pathway, the rollout that DoD has developed. So this is derived from the Cmmc AB town hall that was conducted in January of this year, right? So the Cmmc level, you're going to make a determination based on what you see in your contracts, or having spoken to your contracting officers. So again, NIST 800-171 in its current form is the foundation of level 3. So if you've got 800-171 in your contracts already, you should be shooting for level 3, right? So you make that determination, make sure that you've implemented all of those practices, perform your self-assessment and upload those results into the SPRS system. Start thinking about, with Cmmc, you've got to close all the gaps, right? So if you had 20 poems, you've got to close the poems, and then you'll want to select a C3PAO, which is a third-party certifier. You want to have them, the C3PAO is going to assign some assessors to come out and work with you. They're going to come out and they're going to assess your system. So everything that you said you did, they're going to check behind you and see whether or not you did that. They will write up their results, and they're going to submit that to the Department of Defense. And if you have fully satisfied the requirements, they will issue your Cmmc certification. And if you have not, then you will get a report that indicates which things did not meet the mark, and you'll have to remediate those in order to get the certification. So remember, the certification is a pass-fail. It's not a provisional or something like that. So if you were supposed to meet level 3, you need to meet all of those requirements. And if not, then you will have to make some additional changes. All right. So I don't see any questions. Let's look at our case study. All right. So I'm going to send you into breakout rooms. Looks like we've got about 20 or so people here. You'll go into a breakout room for 15 minutes. What you have in your case study for today is a Cmmc requirement in a RFP that was issued last year. I'd like you to take a look at that requirement. There are some instructions in there that tell you to read through the information and answer the questions as you think about how ready you are and what Cmmc will look like for you over the next couple of years. So I'm going to stop for a second and see if there are any questions before we get started with that. And then if there are no other questions, then I'm going to have Jacob put you into the breakout rooms for 15 minutes. All right, Jacob, I don't see any questions, so you can go ahead and put folks into the breakout rooms, and I will see you guys back here in 15 minutes. All right, so I see folks are coming back from the breakout rooms. All right, so we should have everyone back. Jacob, looks like we might be waiting on a few more people to come back.
All the breakout rooms are closed.
Okay. So I thought we had about 20 folks when we went into them. Hey, Aaron, I'm going to ask you to stop sharing your camera for me, please. Thank you. All right, so let's talk about the case study. Tell me what you thought about it and how you answered it. So you can either put it in the chat or you can unmute yourself and let me know your thoughts. All right, I don't see any questions there. So I will just give you a high-level overview of it, and then we'll go on to our next topic today. When I spoke with the team at the FPC about putting together these workshops, we wanted to make sure that there was some tangible way for you to kind of wrap your heads around these conceptual things that we're talking about. A lot of the times, especially now that we're in this virtual world, when you attend a webinar of this nature, you know, you've got a person like me that's talking for almost 2 hours, and it's really good to be able to have some time during a session to talk to some of the other participants and work on the concepts like you would be able to do if you were in a physical workshop. So my goal has been to make sure that you have some information that can help you to make decisions about the CMMC program, as well as informed decisions about your business. Because when it's all said and done, sessions of this nature, this whole workshop series is about making sure that you are ready and able to compete in the federal marketplace. And so that's our goal with this. So that case study that I shared with you is an excerpt from an actual RFP that was released last year. For those of you that are in the space, you'll recognize 8A STARS 3, right? That's the third GWAC or government-wide acquisition vehicle that GSA issued for the 8A program. So companies that were certified as 8As could compete after that, could compete on that contract. It was one of the first contracts that had a CMMC requirement in it. So certainly the first one outside of the Department of Defense. DoD did issue some contracts last year that had CMMC requirements in it, but they're part of this, this long-term rollout that we'll talk about in a few minutes. And so this response was pass or fail, right? Go, no go. And that's what you're gonna see as CMMC continues to be rolled out. There will be pass-fail criteria that you see in your requests for proposal and in the solicitations that you'll want to be mindful of. So that first question, section B, really was trying to get you, it's the same thing, right? An assessment of where you are currently with your 800-171 implementation. You also notice that it had 800-161, which is the supply chain risk management that GSA is also driving. And ultimately, the goal is to marry the two of them. So you will, you hear a whole lot about Cmmc right now, but you will continue to see the rollout of things associated with supply chain risk management as well, in the context of overall cybersecurity awareness and supply chain risk. And ultimately, they will likely merge because, for contractors, it's difficult for us to keep our hands in all of these different pots with respect to how we maintain our compliance. That second question there was really to force contractors to start thinking about it. This thing is coming. What are you doing about it now? What's your plan? What's your strategy? Have you thought through this? And tell us about it so that they get some sense of whether or not you have pursued any other certifications or have anything that you've put in place right now. And then cybersecurity protections is not a one-time shot, right? Once you put them in place, that last question in section D5 was really about sustainability. Once you build this thing, how are you going to sustain it? Because it's going to cost some money to sustain it. You have to apply resources. Have you thought through that? What's your approach for that? And tell us about it in this solicitation. So hopefully that was helpful to you. That right now, the word is that, as a matter of fact, it's in the draft already. If you look at the draft for Polaris, a similar requirement is in Polaris. So take a look at that one and then you'll know how to be prepared for what you want to do if you're pursuing Polaris. So I don't see any additional questions there about the case study. So I will get on down the road with respect to the projected rollout of Cmmz. So we've talked about timeline, right? We started out in 2016, we're in 2021. There have been some changes. The model has been released. There were changes to the Dfars. Now, what is it going to look like between now and 2025 when Cmmc is this thing that everybody who's doing business with DoD has to have achieved? They have taken a methodical approach to implementing it, one that as a government contractor, I really appreciate because it's given us time to get involved in the process. I shared with you during one of our previous sessions how you can get connected to the town hall meetings. You can go to there's this entire ecosystem that's been built. So you can go to the Cmmc AB page, and there are various different ways that you can get engaged and involved so that you see the direction that DoD is taking with this and have enough time to prepare your business for what's coming down the pike. As you can imagine, rolling out a new framework of this sort and all the contractual requirements that go along with it is a big deal. So DoD has taken a approach of doing some pilots and some other things to make sure that they are prepared internally and that the contracting world is prepared. So they did what are called pathfinders. These pathfinders were developed to help them to reduce risk, right? So you want to roll out this whole Cmmc program, but they really need to understand, like, how is this going to work? How are we going to get all these people certified to be able to conduct the assessments? How are we going to license all of the companies that will be third-party assessors? How are we going to, what does it really look like if we're going to evaluate a contract or really evaluate an information system that's in the commercial space, right? They've been doing this for a long time in the government space, but what does that really look like in the commercial space with respect to assessing a system? So there were several Pathfinder assessments that happened last year. So if you are familiar with any of the terms, you may have heard Pathfinder and Pilot. The Pathfinders were there was non-attribution, right? They were not certification assessments that would affect a contractual decision. And so they worked with the Missile Defense Agency last year to conduct these mock assessments. So they trained the folks, the assessors, so they got their training from the Cmmc AB, and then they conducted these mock assessments so that the assessment guides that the folks that will be coming to your businesses to use, so that they can ensure that there are no loopholes and make sure that you being assessed today by company A are being assessed in using the same criteria and in a form that is based on the same set of guides as company B that's assessing someone else. So that was the intent. with these pathfinders. They wanted to figure out all the lessons learned, right? Where are all the bodies? What do we need to fix? What's clear? What's not clear? How can we use what we've learned from doing this Pathfinder to help us to make our RFP requirements clearer? How can we make sure that what we thought through with respect to flow down clauses is really going to work? But the overall objective was to try to reduce risk associated with implementing CMMC, right? They don't want to roll out this big thing and have it come back and not work really well. So then they also did Pathfinders for 2 assessments with Defense Logistics Agency, and it was 2 prime contractors, and they were assessed by authorized C3PAOs. So when we talked about the different roles in the ecosystem, the last time we did this workshop, I told you that many of those different roles have been through the initial training, and some of them have received what are called provisional licenses, because if they're assessing you at level 3, all of those folks have to be assessed at level 3 as well. So they've got to go through the training, and then their companies have to be assessed. This set of contracts that was defined under this Pathfinder process is something that DoD chose. So you couldn't raise your hand and go, hey, I want to be assessed at, whatever level last year. That was not available to you. They defined these, and it was the same objective, right? Really to just iron out all the kinks in this program so that they can quickly begin to roll it out. There are, when we talk about that ecosystem from our last call, there are lots of companies that see opportunities, right? And so they make a financial investment and getting the licenses and want to really be able to start to build up those programs internally within their company and offer them as a professional service for their customers. None of those resulted in a certification. They were just what are called these Pathfinders, right? So then they finished with those kind of mock assessments that really didn't lead to a certification. And then they've worked across the DoD family of agencies and services and contracts to identify some programs where they could do actual CMMC pilots. So this is the list of programs that have been identified across the Department of Defense for these pilot CMMC assessments that will occur between now and when they get the rest of this program stood up, right? So this year you see foreign military services, women, infant and children overseas program for TRICARE, which is the big defense healthcare system, operating base installation services for the Army, some things through the Air Force, Azure Cloud. Cloud is a big area of concern for both companies that are in the DoD space, in particular when you start thinking about small companies, they're not building their own infrastructures anymore, right? With services that are available through Google and Microsoft Cloud 365 and AWS, those types of cloud environments create some unique both opportunities and challenges from a CMMC standpoint. So that's also been included in there. So you see a variety of different types of programs that were identified across different DoD services and agencies. And DoD is planning to do pilot assessments for them. So we talked about the timeline, right? CMMC is going to be rolled out over a 5-year period of time. So ultimately, by 2025, so you see fiscal year 2025 there, it will be rolled out over 475 new prime contracts with up to 15 new acquisitions occurring in this fiscal year alone. So between now and 2025, and I mentioned this earlier, right? DoD is the approving office for the use of the CMC clauses in any new acquisitions. So if you notice when you looked at I've given you 2 case studies that had the use of CMMC in a contract that is not a DoD contract. You'll notice that it wasn't the Dfars clause that was included in there. it was included in section H, which are typically special requirements, right? So special security requirements, special personnel requirements, any type of special requirements are typically included in section H when you're talking about the Uniform Contract Code, right? So because GSA doesn't have that authorizing authority, they were able to say, in the same way that they did with supply chain risk, right? So 800-161 was this supply chain risk that came out of the decision not to do business with certain companies, telecommunication companies coming out of China, right? While that legislation was still being ironed out and all of those things, GSA went ahead and put language in their contracts. So in the GSA schedules to say, tell us what you're doing with respect to this right now, because as soon as it becomes law, we're going to hold you accountable for it. And that's essentially what they've done with CMMC. So they can't say, oh, you have to have a certain CMMC level, but they can ask you what you're doing to implement it, when you think you're going to have it in place, because they are anticipating that they will include that in their contracts moving forward. So until between now and 2025, it will be DoD that's issuing that guidance. That also means, though, if you let's fast forward to next year, if you see a civilian contract that has one of the FAR clauses or Dfars clauses in there that explicitly calls for CMMC, that means the DoD authorized it. So there's discussion about rolling it out across the federal government as a whole. It's good business, right? It's a whole lot of work for us, but it's good business in the end. And so you'll start to see that more often. We talked about opportunities in the DoD and CMMC ecosystem. I wanted to give you an update on the state of credentials, right? So remember, you could be a registered practitioner, you could be a registered provider organization, a licensed training provider, and all of these different roles that were associated with them. So this is the status of where those things are. So as of January of 2021, there were 1,439 registered practitioners or registered providers, right? These are the individuals who have received the training so that they can provide you with advisory services associated with CMMC. That also includes the certified assessors, right? So certified assessors are a subset of that. There are 382 registered provider organizations. These are organizations that can help you to prepare, right? There are 408 C3PAOs. These are the organizations that will do your actual certification, right? So remember that projected life cycle I told you about. They're the ones that will submit the report to your results to DoD and then be able to issue the certification. 18 licensed publication providers. These are the folks that publish the licensed materials that are used to conduct training and other guides that are associated with the CMMC program. 22 licensed training providers. These are the organizations that conduct training. So they're training these registered practitioners, they're training the C3PAOs, they're training all of the individuals. And then 100 provisional assessors. So these are assessors that have taken their training and still have some of remember the journey that I provided to you, and there's several steps along the journey. They are still in the journey. So they have a provisional approval, but they have not completed their full process yet. All right. And those numbers will continue to increase over time. Remember I gave you a copy of the interim rule. That interim rule contained a lot of the details that relate to these types of credentials. What does the pool of available businesses look like? What industries are they in? And how might they be affected by the CMMC program? This information came from the CMMC AB Town Hall as well. So information that's readily available to you if you participate in those or if you want to go and look at any of the previous town halls. So the one area that has required a little bit more work is the training, right? So they did these pathfinders, they're training people, the licensed training providers and all of the publications and all those things is still in the works. So the program as a whole is still in the works, but this one is one where they are now starting to train provisional instructors, right? Because the goal with the ecosystem is to make sure that all of the people are trained and licensed that are providing these services. So there are a number of different courses that should be coming up for release in March and April of this year. Around the April timeframe, you should start to see the classes that are being offered by the licensed training providers, with the goal that the training and certification framework will be fully implemented later this year, right? So end of the current fiscal year is the time frame for when that training, all of that would be rolled out. And then I want to talk to you about a number, I just kind of grouped them all together, just a number of things that DoD is doing around the rollout of the Cmmc program. And so before we went to the breakout session, who was it? Paul mentioned Katie Arrington, right? And he mentioned that she was a good source. So she is a great source. Again, I'll tell you to make sure that you're reading for yourself as you look at any of these things that have to do with CMMC, because when it's all said and done, Katie is still a person. And so we can't put her in a position where we hold her words against her. When she's talking, she'll tell you to go to the source as well. So we may want to make sure that we're doing that. All right, I see that you have to leave, Victor. It was great spending some time with you. I hope this information has been helpful for you. So for the rest of you that are staying with me, DoD, and Katie is driving a whole bunch of this, and this is why I agree with Paul. She's just been really great. They are rolling out just a number of things to try to make this a successful program. They are looking at internal policy, like the acquisition guidelines. They are training internally in the same way that they're asking us to be trained. They're looking at the way that contracts are written in a way that's going to make contracting a whole lot more efficient for us on this side. They are developing guides and guidelines that can be used by us, that can be used by the companies that are in that ecosystem, right? So making sure that if a C3PAO is doing an assessment, company A and B and C are doing those assessments using a consistent set of methods. They're building systems that will enable both the C3PAOs and contractors like us, just like you saw the SPRS system, relatively new system that will allow us to all function properly within this ecosystem. They are creating toolkits and tools for the various different roles within the CMMC program. And they are looking at the costs associated with what, looking at what this costs us to comply with this program. So I'm just going to talk about some of those, and then I'll talk about what's coming next, right? So cybersecurity is part of a bigger change within the federal marketplace, and in particular within the Department of Defense, to ensure that it is helping to drive decisions, right? DoD wants to make sure that across the acquisition lifecycle, that cybersecurity is being taken into consideration. And I'm going to show you a slide here in a couple of minutes that helps to make that clear, right? So they want to change the way that they're doing business to ensure that people understand the importance of cybersecurity. It is becoming a go, no go decision, right? So with this latest set of Dfars clauses, the contracting officer has the ability to require that cybersecurity be implemented. If it is, then move forward in the acquisition process. And if it is not, say, no, we're not going to move forward, because that thing needs to be done. So cybersecurity is becoming a foundational part of doing business in the federal marketplace. And in particular, it's becoming a foundational way of doing business in the federal, in the Department of Defense. So they've already looked at this defense industrial base. When you read the details that are in that interim rule, you notice that it's not a big number of companies that need the higher levels of certification. Like the levels 3, 4, and 5 are for companies that are a lot more mature. When you think about the entire defense industrial base, only about 60% of them will need, about 60% of them will simply need a level 1. And so if you remember from our discussions before, level 1 are the 17 security requirements that are defined in the FAR, right? And so at that level, you just have to do those 17. For the remaining, DoD looked at itself. They looked at CMMC and they said, well, if we're asking everybody else to do this, we ought to be figuring out what this looks like for ourselves. So if you have a Navy contract, you'll know that the Navy issued its own report on its state of cybersecurity. And it was a precursor to the work that you see that's going on with CMMC. So for as much as a government agency or any cybersecurity expert is telling us to implement multi-factor authentication so that we can secure access to our systems, DoD looked and said, hey, well, what are we doing? Have we done that? Have we implemented multi-factor authentication? We tell everybody else to change their passwords and make their passwords strong passwords. Are we doing the same thing, right? So they took some time, they looked internally and they said, what do we have to do internally to make this program effective? And how are we going to hold ourselves accountable for the same types of things that we're asking our contractors to do? So they are training their contracting officers to understand how to recognize, what they should be putting in contracts, how to use these new systems to evaluate the information that they are receiving. The acquisition guideline has been updated. They are looking at the contract language, right, to make sure that, if you've been on a federal contract before, even though it's supposed to be clear, sometimes the language in the RFP is not very clear, and they're really working to try to do this. And this is one of the areas where Katie Arrington has been extremely helpful. Her experience having worked in industry gives her the firsthand knowledge to help a government person understand what an RFP looks like on our side, right? They put it out there. When we see an RFP, then we're going to go through, and people, they call it different things, right? Like one of my buddies has a company that specializes in proposal management, and they call it shredding an RFP, right? You might shred an RFP. We call it creating a compatibility matrix, a compliance matrix, whatever you might call it. We take that information and we're looking through and find details, and everywhere that it says thou shalt, we're making sure that we can do that. She's making sure that contracting officers understand and program people understand that that's how we interpret it, right? To make sure that as they're writing them in a way that makes it easy for us to be clear about what the requirement is, and then be able to respond to the requirement in a way that ultimately gets to what we want, right? For all of the craziness that you see happen with protests and other things associated with contracts in the federal marketplace, the government puts out an RFP or an RFQ because they have a task that needs to be done. And so the contracting process, the acquisition process itself shouldn't make that so difficult that they're not able to get the services that they need. So they're really working on that. They are working on the guides, as I mentioned before. They are standing up a system or systems that the C3PAOs will be able to use to put all of your assessments and things in, and then they're providing them with some tools. The other thing that they've looked at are the costs, right? So for companies that are at levels 1, 2, or 3, you bear the cost of CMMC. Right. There was some whole lot of discussion when this first came out, because it's not going to be cheap for companies, right? Whole lot of discussion about how are we going to pay for this. At level 4 and 5, the costs associated with CMMC at level 4 and 5 are directly billable to the government. At levels 1, 2, and 3, those are costs that you bear internally within your company, and you can pass those costs along through your overhead and G&A. So one more reason to be sure that you understand what the requirements are, what it's going to cost you to implement them, so that then you can adjust your pricing accordingly, so that that information is taken into consideration. So I mentioned before how DoD is wanting cybersecurity to be foundational. You can see in this graphics, as a contracting officer or a program makes a decision about what type of acquisition they want to do, cybersecurity is this foundational thing that applies regardless of which type of purchase they're going to do, whether you're looking at long-term operations and sustainability that might be acquired through an MCAP program, which is a major capability acquisition program, or through a piece of software that they're acquiring, a defense business system. It doesn't matter what type of acquisition it is. Cybersecurity is a foundational part of those acquisition strategies moving forward. So even on things where some companies have been extremely successful in rapid prototyping and rapid fielding, they're still wanting to look and say, okay, how do we make sure that cybersecurity is a critical component of that? So you'll see that more and more often as you begin to work in this ecosystem. I mentioned before that they were updating the internal guides and resources that they use. And so if you've done any type of systems engineering in the Department of Defense before, then you are probably familiar with DoD 5000, which governs how they acquire and build and deploy technology throughout the Department of Defense. That DoD guideline has been updated. DoD 5000.90 is cybersecurity for acquisition decision authorities and program managers, right? So helping program managers and any type of decision authority within the Department of Defense understand where cybersecurity fits in that process and how to use that to make acquisition decisions on what it is that you're buying or building or acquiring. And then if you have any experience having done cybersecurity assessments on behalf of the government before, or if you have a facility clearance, you may be familiar with EMAS. So EMAS is their, and let me get the acronym right, it's their Enterprise Mission Assurance Support Services System. That's the system where if you have a classified system and you have to do a system security plan for that, you're uploading your SSP and documents into EMAS. And so they are going to expand the EMAS environment so that it can also handle the Cmmc certifications. So the marketplace and the training and all those things associated with the Cmmc AB will be housed there. Information that comes out of that. So the train providers, everybody that makes up the Cmmc AB, that will be input to the initial deployment of the new EMAS system. All of the tools and your information as the defense industrial base company you see down here in the lower left-hand corner, that assessment information will be put into EMAS. And then you'll see this data transfer between EMAS and SPRS. So SPRS is the system that's currently stood up to allow you to report your results, and EMAS is what will be enhanced to allow you to allow DoD to house all of that information in one location. And that information came out in the February town hall meeting. And so you can go and listen to that town hall and get additional information or download the slides that are associated with that. And then in terms of other things that are coming soon, so I talked about the training that the contracting officers are receiving, the information that Katie is sharing with them to help them to understand what it looks like on our side of the fence whenever we're responding. There were a couple of other things that they shared. So one Cmmc pilot has been completed for this year. There are two level 3 pilots that are outstanding that are being conducted for 2 prime contracts. And so we'll find out about those shortly. They are anticipating doing about 97 assessments in fiscal year 2021. So you'll start to see this happening more and more often. And so when we talk about 3 pilots at the prime contractor level, if you've been on some of these DoD contracts, you know a prime contractor can have 60, 70, 80 subcontractors that are associated with them. So it's a trickle-down effect that you'll start to see rolling out through the DoD defense industrial base or companies that are currently doing business there. There are 9 kickoff meetings that are scheduled to occur in the next couple of months because there are 14 pilots that are currently underway and being managed. The thought process is that there'll be 22 pilots in, I'm sorry, 75 pilots in 2022, getting a little tongue twisted there. There's probably going to be a revision to the CMMC model. Now, for those of you that think it's going to get easier, levels 1, 2, and 3 are pretty much set in stone. DoD is saying, Katie has said, keep marching in that direction. They're very comfortable with the way that that requirement has been defined at level 1, 2, and 3. And so they're looking at those higher levels, you know, level 4 and level 5, which are these critical, you know, classified programs or programs that are much more critical than you see at levels 1, 2, and 3. One of the things that came up in the last town hall was about the use of the marketplace. The use of the marketplace is simply recommended. It is not mandatory, so you don't have to use the companies in the marketplace to get prepared. You do have to work with a DoD license C3PAO in order to get your certification. And then they also talked about whether or not, so when you are, and this is a little bit more technical, and so I'll leave it at this here soon. When you are when you're assessing a system, you essentially have to define what's in and what's out. So the scope of that from a technical standpoint. And there were questions about what does it look like if I was assessed at one and now I want to be assessed at another? And you essentially just have to cover the gap, right? So the delta between the two, as long as nothing within that original scope has changed. So if you've changed things, you'll have to make some changes there. There were questions about reciprocity with other certifications like FedRAMP, which is the federal cloud-based certification, ISO 27001, which is the international cybersecurity regulation. So you will begin to hear some additional things about that. And the DoD definitively confirmed that Department of Homeland Security and GSA have asked to use the CMMC program, and they're working with them on how to adopt that. So you'll start to see that coming soon. All right, Jacob, I'll ask you to do our last poll here, and then we'll wrap up for today. All right, so ultimately our goal is that you will have increased your awareness about how CMMC affects your business. All righty, so 80%. All right, Jacob, you can close that poll and share those results. All righty, so the majority of you say that you have increased your awareness about how the CMMC impacts your business. Ultimately, that was the goal that the FPC wanted to achieve. I hope that this time for you has been meaningful. I'm going to stop and see if there are any questions. And if there are none, I'm going to turn it back over to Tommy.
Angela, thanks very much again for another outstanding session. And we, you know, speaking on behalf of everybody, I think we greatly appreciate your time and the effort you've taken to provide us with the most current information that is coming out of the five-sided building. That's who's leading this. But it is definitely going to migrate to other federal agencies as we can see. I want to thank the folks that tuned in and that stayed with us. We do have just one last survey that Jacob will put up right now, and it's the parting survey, and we'd ask you to take time and fill that out for us. While you're doing that tomorrow, from 1 to 3. We have a proposal development workshop that the team can put the link in the chat in case you didn't see our flyer that's been going out, that went out in constant contacts if you're part of the consortium. If not, you can pick it up out of the chat, and it's on the house. All you got to do is sign up, and I think they still got seats. So, Jacob, I guess that's come and gone, right?
Yes, sir. It has been sent out, and we still have some seats available. We have about
Okay.
15 seats left.
All right. I think there were 5 questions, Jacob. Can't remember. I apologize.
7. We have
7.
4
Okay.
more left.
Lucky number. If you're rolling dice. As Angela said, if this was your first time with us, the first 3 workshops are available. And I think they're on our website or on our YouTube, Jacob.
They're located on both.
Okay. So if you go to www.mbdafpc.com, you'll be able to see the first 3 workshops along with this one will be posted by Friday. It is www.mbdafpc.com. And Miss Madison just put it in the chat. Well, again, I want to thank you for tuning in. And if you're interested in proposal development, tomorrow, Thursday, 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And the link is, I believe, in the chat. Okay. Thanks very much, everybody. And Angela, if you're still there, thanks again. And good luck in your next meeting, which is in 5 minutes. Okay.